Good evening, gents. Welcome to Man's Hour, episode 2. We are here to discuss the Roe versus Wade decision. I'm joined by three gentlemen of power. First, we've got Red Hammerhead. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for coming on. Next, we've got Todd from Praise of Folly. How you doing, Todd?
Doing great. Thanks.
Awesome. And finally, we've got Furius, our friend from Australia. How are you, sir?
Good evening. Well, it is early morning here in the prison colony, but indeed, good morning, and thank you for the invite, Red Hawk. Pleased to be here.
All right, cool, guys. Well, we are here to discuss the Roe v. Wade overturning. What does that mean for men? What's that mean for us in the sexual marketplace and all that good stuff? So first off, I wanted to bring in Red Hammerhead here. He is a lawyer and he's got some expertise in the area, and he wants to share with us, what the actual decision is, what it isn't, how this is going to affect us. So Hammerhead, take it from here.
Thank you. Well, at a basic level, all the decision really does is send this issue back to the states. And it, for all intents and purposes, abortion will continue to be just as legal as it has been in half the states. And then the other half of the states will get to restrict abortion pretty much however they like. And I'll spend just a couple minutes talking about some of the legalese and some of the issues here. Obviously, one of the reasons we care so much about the Supreme Court is because the Supreme Court, since the Marbury v. Madison decision, is the one who interprets. So much sovereignty rests in the Supreme Court. And they have what's called judicial review over the other branches of government in order to determine when something is or isn't constitutional. In this case, these rights that are like the right to abortion or the right to contraceptives or homosexual marriage or sodomy, those kind of rights that have been pulled by the Supreme Court basically out of their ass are based on the substantive due process right, which is found primarily in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which the 14th Amendment and the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment, they basically provide that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And the court in 1905 came up with substantive due process, which essentially means the government shall not treat people unfairly. That's about as complicated as that topic is. Obviously, there's a lot of law and a lot of case law on individual things, but that's basically what it comes down to. And that's why the standard is so subjective. And that's why some justices like Justice Thomas truly hate substantive due process with a fiery, burning passion. And I found his concurrence to be definitely the most entertaining of the entertaining part of the decision. But basically, and I'll just talk about substantive due process here for a 1 minute, but basically substantive due process breaks into two categories: fundamental or non-fundamental rights. And fundamental rights, as determined by the Constitution, or according to the court, are they apply a strict scrutiny analysis to it, which basically means it's not going to happen. If it's strict scrutiny, what happens is they have to decide if the government is depriving them of their fundamental rights in a narrowly tailored fashion to achieve a legitimate government objective that furthers a compelling government interest. And in this case, any restrictions would pretty much fail because they'll find a way to make it not narrowly tailored. And with respect to non-fundamental rights, and these would be right to welfare, right to international travel, those kind of things. They apply a rational basis review, which basically says that the government can deprive them of their rights as long as the reason given is rational, essentially. And the government, it doesn't even have to be the real reason; it can just be whatever reason the government gives. So, and a couple, just really quickly, some funny examples. There are things like I remember it was an Oklahoma case that went up to the Supreme Court. Basically, they were saying that they were engaging in sterilization of repeat offenders of moral offenses, but they were exempting, which basically just means repeat criminals. They were sterilizing them, but they exempted white collar criminals from that, and they applied strict scrutiny and struck it down. But it's funny how these kind of situations come up. But I'll leave it there for now, and we'll go ahead and get on to some of the other things. Or if you have any questions specific to the decision here or how it might affect, gay marriage and that kind of thing.
Right. So first, let me say, I've been hearing all over the news and absolutely everywhere that this means immediately that abortion is banned across the land, and we're jumping back to the 1850s here, and all women's rights are completely gone now. What do you say to
that? If only, But I guess what I would say to that is that this essentially changes nothing except that the fight now spreads over 50 jurisdictions instead of a single jurisdiction. So people who are pro-life now are going to have to organize at a more state level to attempt to get this, which I think will actually, my personal opinion, is it's going to dilute the power of the pro-life movement, because it's going to get mired in specific issues that affect all of these different states. And but that's basically all this decision does. However, I will say that Justice Thomas's concurrence, which wants to do away completely, which is where he's talking about doing away completely with substantive due process, that substantive due process is where almost all of the left's court wins have come from over the past 70 years. So that is something that I saw a lot of targeting of Justice Thomas online over his concurrence, and that is why you're seeing that.
I see. That's an interesting take about how you think this is going to dilute the pro-life movement as a whole. Furious, Todd, what do you think about that?
Well, about diluting the pro-life movement or Roe more broadly?
Either or.
Well, one of the things that's interesting is, as of course, Red Hammerhead said, is that this doesn't. So when the left is saying that this is legislating from the bench and this is, a quote unquote unfair measure. Well, back in 1973, if there had been a plebiscite, a popular vote on abortion, it never would have passed. So first of all, this is a precedent they set. So they just don't like it when it's used against them. But second of all, this ruling is disanalogous, right? So in 1973, I don't know if there were any individual states that allowed for abortions at that point, but most did not. And then it said all those laws have to go because the Supreme Court said so. The equivalent would be today is if this new ruling said that abortion was illegal throughout every 50 states, which it doesn't say that. It sends it back to the states, which, by the way, is Ron Paul's position from 2012, and i.e. the libertarian position. So this is hardly a far right conservative victory. This is what at least many political libertarians, including Ron Paul, have said should have been the case all the time. Now, the other thing is, why is it that Roe v. Wade for so long was untouchable? Well, I think the main reason why it was untouchable is it was the linchpin of the modern economy, right? How often have we heard women say, "I can't get an abortion because I am going to college"? Well, okay, yeah, or I can't get an abortion, or I can't have a child because I'm going for my career. So the issue then is the powers that be. In the way I see it, in order to facilitate the race to the bottom in the labor market, to depress it as low as possible, utilize these feminine hygiene products and devices to flood the market with women, to then dilute the value of labor. And the only way that women could stay in the labor market would be if we had those things supporting them. Now, we don't. In the states that will outlaw abortion after Roe v. Wade is overturned, we won't have that anymore. So I think a couple things we can see here. First of all, most college students are female. In states that outlaw abortion, we're probably going to see a lot fewer women going to college, which means these colleges might just implode because that's where all the money's coming from. The other thing is, and I think it was June 17th, and seeing this coming down the pike, the New York Times published an article why the future isn't female anymore, basically conceding that feminism had lost due to a combination of infighting amongst feminists. I assume that means the turf tranny debate, among other things. The fact that most people don't like feminists even anymore, even like liberal men are like, yeah, this is a problem. And the fact that they saw the Supreme Court ruling coming. So we could also see a post-female economy because, again, there's once women have children, they seldom go back to work. That's a statistic that Jordan Peterson brings up a lot. And so if there's no way for them to prevent conception, it's going to radically change the way they behave in life. So I think we could see in the states that outlaw abortion, the university system collapse because women won't be going there anymore. And then you'll see potentially a post-female economy. Now, in the states that legalize abortion, they're probably going to legalize up to the third trimester, partial birth abortion, maybe even infanticide. I mean, this is the Peter Singer crowd who thinks that, a 3-year-old child has the same moral worth as a pig. In that case, we'll see the population decline issue accelerate, which will then mean more immigration, which will then mean more of all the things we're already seeing in California and New York and places like that. I think but then again, okay, then why was this allowed to pass? If, in my estimation, it was a precondition for the modern economy. I think there's a couple ways you could look at it. One, Trump might have been a real black horse. He might have been that dark horse candidate that the evangelical gambit worked. They got the 3 conservative Supreme Court justices they wanted, and they overturned Roe. That could be one explanation. Another explanation could be Keith Woods recently did a video on collapse, catabolic collapse, where empires don't collapse all at once, but they're a complex web of systems, and each system starts to collapse. And when they run through the red, they don't innovate. They don't innovate out or make it more efficient. They just cannibalize capital stock. And so you can't cannibalize your food production first. You can't cannibalize your energy or transportation first, because then the whole thing falls apart. So this could be cannibalizing the capital stock of, say, abortion services, because no one's gonna die if you get rid of those. So that could be seen as a rational choice to get rid of it. And maybe even the elites are beginning to see that the population crisis is reaching ahead. And by getting rid of abortion, they hope to facilitate more births, because the population crisis is getting serious.
Yeah, I think I want to push back a little bit on the first, the university question, because yes, majority of women, universities by a whole are majority women. However, majority of the universities in the United States are located in blue states. So I'm not entirely convinced that this is going to stop women from going to college, or even stop them from entering the workforce. I think if this is going to change women's behavior in any way, I think what it's going to change is upfront, rationalizing of, oh, am I going to have sex with this guy? I don't think, the people who are really rich are still going to get their abortions. In the United States, this isn't a blanket ban of everything, and women are still going to enter into the workforce because there are ways aside from abortion. Everybody's familiar with the 20 different, uses for preventing pregnancy, whether it's the pill, whether it's Plan B, whether it's, any other of the myriad ways that women have birth control access to them. So I'm not entirely convinced that this is going to see a big change in that system. I think this is a stepping stone in the right direction, but I don't think this is the linchpin.
Yeah, I'll add on to that just a little bit. I was thinking about pushing back as well. Although I will say that depending on how you define, a life and abortion, I mean, this basically allows the states to define when life begins. And you could see certain contraceptives like Plan B or other contraceptives that actually kill a fertilized egg. You could see access to those things rolled back, which could could result in some of what he is saying. But I guess I would say that the more important than abortion really is the contraception issue, because it's contraceptives that have changed how women behave in the sexual marketplace. And unless you eliminate contraceptives, you'll no longer return to a natural state of the sexual marketplace.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Furious, what do you think? Anything to add?
A couple of points. I might sort of go in reverse, just as a friend told you had a few good points. I just want to try and canvass them one by one. And starting from the last and going forward, the point about sort of decline and cannibalism. It's actually a really interesting point. I honestly didn't have that epiphany myself, but it's quite true. And I mean, many of us are familiar with the saying that sort of empires collapse very, very slowly and then very, very quickly. And I guess that's sort of conjoins that line of thinking whereby you sort of have all these isolated but intertwined networks of things that hold up a society and hold up a culture and a nation state, I suppose, in the modern day. And as these systems degrade over time, whether it's a degradation of infrastructure, degradation of capitalization of finance, the degradation of just the ability of personnel, and a whole raft of considerations, then the things come in, and maybe just abortion services in this context happens to be one of the sacrificial lambs that the elite are willing to part with. Another thing is that I think as much as we've mentioned, or you guys have mentioned contraception in this context, I mean, yes, I think whilst contraception is widespread, there's a cushioning between sort of behavior and sort of incentives and disincentives for certain behavior pertaining to both, well, really men and women, but obviously women more so because they actually carry the pregnancy, they carry a child, they carry a baby. But I think the inability to just stroll into, in some states, obviously, the inability to stroll into an abortion center and just yeet the child out of their womb and then go on with life, as it was before, that this being curtailed, I think, will make a difference. How much, being able to quantify that difference will be difficult. I guess we can only really make that determination when we start to see statistics rolling forward. But one factor of consideration that's worth bringing to bear in this discussion is that often, and I mean, I'm saying this as someone who's looking outside of the US looking in, and there's obviously the electoral map in America really presents quite a distinction of almost, you sort of, the USA is almost kind of like two nations sort of squashed into one, really. So you have the coastal elites and the flyover country. And there has been, or certainly I've noticed that there has been a well-founded fear that as collapse is occurring in places like New York State, or New York City rather, and Los Angeles and San Francisco, and sort of Canada and New York and places like that become more and more unlivable. Baltimore, Philadelphia, there's a whole raft of places like that. And then they, particularly the more wealthy ones who can afford to move, leave those places and go to, Austin, I suppose Texas writ large, and other places I'm sure you guys could elucidate where the Liberals are actually going to. And sort of, I suppose the joke's always been, oh, how the hell do we keep the Liberals out and prevent them from turning our good red states into blue shitholes? And ironically, the overturning of Roe v Wade, turning such a lightning rod of an issue, which abortion is, to the states, where in the case of Texas, you still have an overarching sort of conservative right-wing culture that exists in Texas. And they've just gone ahead and, the laws are on the books and they've just put them, they've reactivated them essentially and they're back in play. Something like this would actually act as a massive, massive deterrent to that interstate sort of migration that does occur in America. And you've sort of got, by incident or by accident, a deterrent from Liberals coming into red states and then turning them blue, as they've done in other parts of the country. Another thing I just wanted to mention too, because Todd did mention the Labour component of this discussion, and that is, I think that's quite an accurate observation to make, is because really since women have flooded into the labour market, really from certainly the post-war times, post-World War II, but certainly throughout the 70s and 80s and onwards, and certainly into higher and higher positions, we've seen this sort of dilution of purchasing power, of the value of money, the value of labor. All these things are sort of intertwined, along with mass migration as well, which is coupled with that. And those factors do synergize comprehensively, because with the reduction in birth rate, you've then got the excuse, what Bernie Sanders, for instance, used to call a Koch brothers exercise of, swamping a country with immigration for cheap labor, and therefore robbing the lower classes in the United States of their labor value, with women being able to or have these ability. Hang on, let me rephrase that. With the facilities available, such as extensive contraception and abortion facilities and whatever, that has obviously impacted the birth rate comprehensively. And whilst birth rates have stagnated, then of course, there's that excuse to bring in migration. So by actually sort of pulling out one of those linchpins of that entire discussion point, of that entire rationale for migration because of the birth rate, well, then those who are pushing forward that argument really have a bind on their hands. And I dare say we're going to, as people argue against this overturning of Roe v Wade and sort of the implications that follow that, I think we're going to see more and more people, shall I say, pull off the mask and expose their real selves. So I think we're in for a hell of a journey to see how this actually pans out.
Yeah. 2 quick points that I'll add to this. First, I would say that if this was to have first I'll say that obviously corporations have an interest in keeping women in the workforce to artificially keep wages low. And you're seeing this right now with multiple companies on Twitter that are voicing their support for supporting women in their corporations, saying, we will cover your abortion and traveling you to a state where it is legal, because that is more economically useful for us to pay for that transportation to a state and then pay for your abortion with your health insurance, as opposed to losing you to motherhood and putting you on maternity leave, or just having you not come back to the office anyway. So that definitely is one of the motivations for keeping abortion on the books from a corporation standpoint. So what do you guys think about that?
I would agree that that's exactly what they want to do. Because again, so if we look at the goal of labor is to keep the price of labor very high. Whether that's because they want to instigate, a national strike out of the socialists, or because, they just want robust labor unions. Capital wants to keep labor very cheap. And what people don't tell you, but if you look at the actual results, has been, is all of these legal privileges granted to women, all of these technologies that were invented for women to control their fertility, has had the effect of massively diluting the workforce in such a capacity that, for example, I think since 1975, male wages have not increased. And after 1978, women have become the absolute majority of the workforce. So it's pretty clear at this point, women are just soaking up men's earnings. And even if they're not working, something like 80% of all consumer spending is done by women. So they're spending their husband's money anyhow. So that, there's that as well, which is why commercials tend to be more aimed at women, because they're the ones doing the buying. But the other thing is, the other reason why corporations want women in the workforce is they're snitches. You can read George Orwell, 1984. He talks about Julia, the snitch of the party. He's got a little great opening statement about her. Aristotle talks about this. Heck, even the post-left anarchist Bob Black in his Abolition of Work talks about this. That, prior to putting women in the workforce, you'd have strikes and men would be rowdy, and the corporation, would just be like, okay, fine. They drunk too much on Saturday, they're not coming in to work. Sorry, they drink too much on Sunday, so they're not coming in on Monday. And you just had to deal with it. But when you put women in, it broke the back of the unions. And so, yeah, this is all part of a broader plan to dilute the workforce and then control it.
I think another point go ahead, Furius.
No, I'm just going to say, because Todd here raised a really good point, and something that's very much sort of attaches to that is the fact that as women have been, well, I would like to say torn out of their houses, but as they've been induced out of their houses by sort of these neoliberal lies about independence and work and money and whatever, it has given the powers that be unfettered access to people's children. And it's when those children have been subjected to the relentless intellectual sort of smothering, where they really, if you think, say, Gen Xers, millennials, and now Zoomers have probably been the three generations that have been put through that ringer in a way that has been unprecedented in history. That has also empowered the regime to manners of magnitude that probably even we struggle to comprehend.
Yeah, absolutely true. And you can just take a look at the typical jobs that women go into the workforce for. They get their college degrees, they're riddled with debt, and their jobs generally pay far less than men's jobs. And then when they go on to have children, they just put their childcare costs in front of that. So the classic meme is, oh, I'm working my $45,000 a year HR job, and I'm paying $32,000 a year for daycare.
Yeah, it's entirely counterintuitive, and it really is, you might say, emblematic of the creation of like an ersatz or a Ponzi economy. Like, in the end, childcare doesn't actually add value to the economy. You know, HR doesn't add value to the economy. You know, there's an argument that, you know, yeah, okay, businesses, you know, say like an accountancy firm needs secretaries, or, you know, a lawyer's office needs secretaries, fine. But this vast expansion of, you know, executive assistants and whatever, it is a load of tosh. It is totally false economy. It's not, you know, none of those people are responsible for adding, you know, metric tons of corn or wheat into the economy, or producing meat, or, you know, designing structures or building plant or capital which actually improves economy and creates jobs and wages. All this stuff is phony economy. And in the case of, you know, when we talk about women's proximity in the economy in the modern day, all these things are sort of cyclical. You know, like, yeah, you go into university to earn a non-degree, and then you go into sort of a non-job that is essentially unproductive. And then, if in the instance that those particular women actually have children, then there's a childcare industry, which is often itself dominated by women anyway. And sort of on it goes, like this self-feeding, parasitical tentacle of the economy that is intentionally dysfunctional and intentionally parasitic, and intentionally deleterious to the society with which it exists.
Yeah, and we can also tie this into the concept of hypergamy, in the sense that women generally always date up on the socioeconomic scale. You know, they look for men who are richer than them, taller than them, stronger than them, older than them, and things like this. And when you have women being affirmative action placed into some of these higher up jobs that actually aren't creating anything in the real economy, but their mind is telling them that they are creating something, that limits the pool of men that are available to them to such a degree. You now have the case of rise of the she economy that Morgan Stanley has put out in anticipation for 2030, that 50% of women in the United States will be single and childless.
Yeah, from my perspective, I mean, I see this in my life. I know plenty of female attorneys that really probably should have been legal secretaries or paralegals of some kind. Their skill set is more suited to that kind of work, and they're not as conflict driven. And in those scenarios, you know, in the past, you would have a lot of legal secretaries who end up dating and marrying the attorneys that they work with or work for. And I think that is a lot more healthy than this situation where their education is subsidized to be an attorney, and then they're somebody who's, you know, you can tell they're conflict avoidant, and so they burn out after, you know, a decade or even less than that. And now they're, you know, 35, 40 years old, and they've never found somebody who was higher, you know, higher up on the scale than them. And it creates a lot of very embittered women. I mean, I have situations I have shown, like, you know, just talking in the office, shown women oh, here's my kids, you know. And there was one woman who literally, she was like 45, never had any kids, and she, like, tears came to her eyes. So I mean, I see that every day, the kind of person that this destroys, basically. So
Well,
what's that meme? Men standard of living plummets, women most affected.
Yeah.
It's that
Yeah.
joke again.
Yeah, I think this also ties into something interesting that Todd brought up earlier, the concept of the snitch. And we see this where every single business is now infected with HR ladies, and everyone's afraid to, talk to women in the office ever since the Kavanaugh hearings about Me Too and stuff like this. So traditionally, that was one of the ways that people would, meet up together after college and high school. You'd find somebody at your office, somebody at your workplace. And now, because we've been infected with all this, woke bullshit, people are scared to, even converse with each other in an office-like setting. So that's another way that, women in the workforce has, largely destroyed our relationships.
Right. One thing I want to bring up as well to sort of go back to some of the objections that you and Red Hammerhead raised. So, first of all, if we look at the claim that there's all of these underlying technologies. So yes, on the one hand, there's legal privileges that women have over men when it comes to who gets the child and the special advantages they get, which allow them to quote unquote compete against men. But there's also the underlying technology stratum, which is feminine hygiene products, which is abortion, which is all these other things. Now, if we look at the legal element, one of the things I've been hearing, and you mentioned this yourself, Red Hammerhead, is that Clarence Thomas is saying that, well, we need to rethink a lot of these rulings, including Lawrence v. Texas, which, as you said, legalized sodomy, Obergefell, which legalized gay marriage. I don't remember the one that legalized contraception, but that was in his sights as well. So, because the argument is we rule by precedent. So the precedent of all of these cases that the left has been using to win over the last 70 years is overturned, then all of those cases are now open for investigation. And one can only, hypothesize how the rulings will go. But if we continue with this precedent ruling, we could see and the left is afraid of this, we could see all of these gains undone, in which case what I'm saying becomes a lot more realistic. Now, the other thing is, even if that doesn't happen, if we have a system where you put stress on it, you don't have to remove all the pieces of the system for the stress to break it. And I think abortion is a key stressor. If you remove, the female economy collapses because women don't use contraception. Planned Parenthood's entire business model is that women will not regularly use contraception, so they'll have to go get the baby aborted. And it's a successful business model because women don't consistently use contraception. So I'm thinking that, okay, even if we don't get that far, abortion is a big enough W for the right and a big enough L for the feminist movement that it could put sufficient stress on the entire system that it implodes.
Well, I can't really speak to implosion necessarily, but I agree with you definitely that putting any additional friction on sort of that the female, abortion and these contraceptives allow for the sort of sexual freedom that has really twisted the I guess current familial structure and sexuality in the United States and honestly the entire Western world. And any additional friction between their ability to behave in those ways, the ability to free sexual access at any time, any friction on that is going to change behavior. So I do agree with that. And with respect to what Justice Thomas was saying about these other decisions, the reason that I didn't even when I first opened the opinion, I immediately just control find for Thomas because I knew exactly. I knew that whatever he said on this issue would be the most relevant and important thing because he is basically he and Scalia, and he's more based than even Scalia was, but they're part of this this project that basically comes out of the WASP interest groups in the United States to make the court. And this has been, at least a 50-year project, if not more, really since the time of FDR, kind of a reaction to him. But basically, if they really did strip substantive due process out of the law, then it wouldn't just be up for debate. All those rights would no longer exist at the federal level. Without substantive due process, they don't exist at all. And so you end up with, it would devolve back to the states. And, I think that given the current state of the Republican Party, you probably wouldn't see very many states, reversing the homosexual marriage or sodomy laws. But without the law, without the sort of federal judicial mandate upholding it, there's definitely a lot more room to play. So I agree with what you're saying, and to some extent. Obviously, with how much this decision affects the actual labor force, I'm not so sure. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I just yesterday saw local news stories about how they're going to start opening up. Planned Parenthood is going to start opening up Planned Parenthood abortion clinics in Eastern Oregon, right on the border of Idaho. And, those clinics would only be 45 minutes away from Boise. So in reality, I think a lot of these red states really do, they border blue states. And so I don't know, is it, when a woman is, a liberal woman is looking at what she thinks is a life-ending decision, would she be willing to drive an hour and a half, to the nearest blue state and get an abortion? And would it be that much friction? I'm not sure that it would be. That's what I have to say about that.
It's a good point.
As a slight joke, that woman would be violating interstate highway clause. There you go, boom. but more seriously, though, to piggyback off Pertinax too, you mentioned how this entire quote feminine economy is completely unproductive. Childcare, abortion, contraception, all of this. Yes, exactly. And we're in a declining empire. So if the declining empire has to slash capital stock, is it going to slash the grain silos, the ports, the factories? No, it's going to slash the things that don't produce anything. So it's going to slash what we might call the she-economy infrastructure. That stuff is totally useless. It produces no value. They're going to slash that before they slash, roads, ports, factories, and things like that.
That stuff is basically welfare for those women. So perhaps, I just don't know what, maybe it gets slashed, but I see it as more welfare. And you know how hard it is to get rid of welfare programs. They might just collapse before they're willing to get rid of that kind of stuff.
Well, let me put it this way. It's not so much about, okay, so let's look at another crisis that's brewing for the women's reproductive issues here. Tampon shortages. They're not being produced in sufficient numbers. So you can just do sort of an end run around the whole welfare thing. If you just go upstream far enough to where it's being produced and just tell them to reallocate the resources to something more useful, they will. And it doesn't matter what rights are on the books.
Yeah, I think I made this point on Twitter as well, that I think this Roe v. Wade decision is purely just a moral decision all across the board, in the sense of this is quite literally just about saving the lives of the innocent and as many innocent lives that are possible for us to save. I do not see this one decision bringing about the end of the she-economy. I don't see this being the end of contraception. I don't see it being the end of gay marriage. I just don't think the political will is there. And my reasoning behind this is that I could totally see, particularly in purple states, this issue is getting kicked back to the states. I could see, little loopholes being inserted into abortion laws in the state where they would give exceptions for cases such as rape and incest. Now, we all know that this is the vast minority of abortions. Most of them are done electively. We all know this. But just because that loophole is there, it means that the actual issue really isn't being held to account. What you'll see in cases like that, where, in my opinion, the majority of states are going to have these loopholes, you're going to see a spike in rates of like Me Too cases and stuff like that. So I think women are still going to get their abortions in America in the majority of cases. What this is, though, is that people who are living in red states no longer have to pay for it with their tax dollars.
Yeah, and well, to that point, I agree that this is not really treating the underlying problem. We didn't just go from traditionalist family units to abortion on demand. It took all of those steps of, contraception and all these other progressive, political steps to get to the point of abortion. And I think that the progressives really overextended their hand in 1973 on Roe v. Wade because they needed that concept. I think sort of the word is, I'm losing the word right now, but percolate or metastasize, I guess, before they could really do it. But I guess that's what I was thinking about that as you were talking. The labor issue is another interesting facet of this, because it's true that there are, most of those jobs that the economy have are useless, but there are, on the upper end of the spectrum, there are a lot of women who they're single and they don't have families, and they are married absolutely to their jobs, and they're pretty high functioning, and they they do a lot of work. I mean, for example, attorneys, I think more attorneys now coming out of law school are women rather than men, and most attorneys are pretty high functioning, and so you would see a massive there's already labor shortages, and we could be seeing greater labor shortages with decisions like this, and especially if this gets capitalized on, which would be interesting in terms of stagnation of wages. Because looking at my own wages, I'm making like half of what an attorney of my similar skill and experience would be making in the 1960s. So I crossed my fingers. Maybe I'll be able to buy that house after all.
And just on that point, very quickly, if I may, we also have to consider too, what are the typical ideological leanings of those who get into these fields, be it, and to some degree, there's, if you have a Venn diagram as well, like when we're talking about abortion as an issue, you have this legal advocacy or legal activist aspects. You got like doctors who will, invent all kinds of contortions to try and reinterpret, say, the Hippocratic Oath to sort of make what they do sound palatable when it sort of isn't. And you mentioned like these high functioning women, is that, of course, I think there would be a minority who would say slant our way, but sort of inversely, there's going to be certainly a significant majority of them who will slant the other way, and they ultimately exist as to be enforcers of the regime and its whims, and that is dangerous. Like you say, if they're not actually married to, if they're not moored to children or to home or to family or whatever, and they're moored to their job, and moreover they sort of, in the absence of, say, a belief in God or a faith of any kind, if their religious zeal is channeled towards ideology and these kind of topics, which we're seeing with the reaction to Roe v. Wade, that is something that we would have to also be mindful of, because it is in its own way, I don't want to say dangerous, but it's certainly hazardous, because that kind of zeal, when it's channeled in that fashion, it does have an effectiveness of some kind. And the astonishing thing with liberalism, it has, for all of its sort of tendencies for catabolism and for corrosion and subversion, it is self-replicating, and we would be unwise to dismiss that.
Yeah, and I can actually give you a couple of some real world anecdotes to that end. I've never met anybody who is a more zealous advocate for the progressive utopian dreams of the state than female attorneys. They run for office, they run for their city council, yeah. They advocate for changes in the law that they want to see, and they do it zealously, and they can get themselves into the legislative halls of power, not just as representatives, but as staff, as consultants, as any number of these different they seem kind of made up positions, but in reality what they're doing is they're there pushing the progressive power structure along.
They become informal apparatchiks, essentially, like via NGOs and committees and all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah, and they have a ton of time on their hands. It makes them feel like what they're doing is good. They have no commitments to family, and just in my state, you'll find that if you look at the mayors of some of these small towns, not necessarily rural towns, but small towns that are on the outlying Seattle or Portland or any of these cities, you'll find that a lot of them are the mayors are women attorneys who are in their 40s with one or no kids, and you you wonder why these policies are not being opposed in cities and stuff. And you just look at the makeup of the city councils and the mayor's office, and you'll find your answer. So yeah, I mean, it's not just dangerous; they are the sort of preeminent enforcers of the progressive order, I guess. Or
I'm sure you guys have heard me use the phrase before. They are the you might say they are the elite of the Janissary Corps, of the regime.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So, gentlemen, what do we think that this has an effect on men in the actual, dating marketplace, in the sexual marketplace? How do you think this is going to change things overall? Say you're a single guy who's in the game right now. What do you think that this is actually going to change for guys on the ground?
I think that it's gonna affect them more vis-a-vis the women, how the women respond. So there's gonna be right now and for the next few months, a lot of women are gonna be in panic mode because they believe the liberal lie that the overturning of Roe means abortion's outlawed everywhere. Like, for example, they were rioting in LA. Guys, you're gonna have like partial birth abortion tomorrow. What do you it's California. So what I think will happen is you'll have a lot of these girlfriends trying to dragoon their boyfriends into some sort of like political activism. We got to fight for reproductive rights. We got to fight the patriarchy, and it's going to lead because again, right? Women don't have violence intrinsic to themselves, right? Barbarossa talks about hybristophilia, where women like to hook up with guys that they can then manipulate to do violence in their name. So I think we're going to see a lot of women leveraging their hybristophilia to get their boyfriends to start, going out to marches, going out to threaten people, to quote unquote fight for reproductive rights.
Yeah, like a political conscription by guilt, essentially. So it's like, oh well, if you're going to be my friend and my boyfriend or my husband, well, you're going to get that placard and you're going to go down to Pennsylvania Avenue and you're going to stick it to the patriarchy. And I dare say the weak men amongst us tragically will.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, I mean, I've been out of the dating game a while, having a wife and fourth kid about to be born. But I can say that I think that there's now, most men, I think, especially around the age of 20, they are not thinking about abortion. They're not thinking about any of this. And, abortion is something that a lot of them pressure their girlfriends into when they realize it's an option, when something like that happens. I think this places more risk on them of, sort of permanently affecting their life, because if abortion is not legal or possible, then they are going to have to deal with the consequences of those decisions. And the consequences, unfortunately, are in large part imposed by the state. It's not just the consequences of you have a child and you want to see that child, your genetic offspring, you want to see them succeed. Obviously, those are, everybody handles that differently, but you have child custody and child care payments and these kind of things that are going to come along with it. So I think that anybody who's smart is going to handle that risk accordingly. But I think you're going to end up with a lot of men who fail to grasp that this is something that's going to happen to them that is not going to have a quick fix anymore. So,
well, one thing too is the conservative talking point is just take responsibility. Well, what's going to happen is a lot of people won't, and what we're just going to see is a series of ugly tragedies in the states that actually outlaw abortion, where people are just to quote Rollo, they're thinking in old order ways. They don't understand what it means for all these laws to be different now. So they're just going to have all these car wrecks, proverbial car wrecks all over social life, where men and women haven't been paying attention to what the laws really mean now, and it'll just be a bunch of really ugly car wrecks.
Yeah, it'll likely take some time for the new culture after the laws have changed to fully set in and everything like that. What about all these talking points that we've seen from your BuzzFeeds and your placard signs and everything, saying that, oh, we need to mandate vasectomies for men because we have to control their bodies in the same way we control women's bodies. I actually think this is actually really hilarious because they're actually giving away the game there. If all men had mandated vasectomies, that would be the equivalent in power wise of women having the power of abortion. Like mandated vasectomies would give men 100% control of the birthing process, which is literally what abortion is. It's female 100% control of the birthing process. So it actually wouldn't be a fix that these dopes with their placard signs think it would be. I just think it's hilarious.
I did mention just briefly, before when I was talking, that when pushed hard enough, these creatures have a tendency of letting the mask slip, or sometimes in their fits of rage they just tear it off, when they do their pussy marches and all this sort of nonsense and claptrap that they do. And I think we've seen it time and time again, as whether it's creeping violentalism, whether it's creeping basal radicalism at the heart of things, whether it's sort of like this new generation being rather more intemperate, or less composed, or less politically or ideologically alert or suave than their predecessors. We're going to see this. And it's that old adage of don't interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. And I think that these those kind of activists and advocates are going to do that as a matter of course, a matter of personality. I mean, these are people who have an incapability of demonstrating discipline and self-respect and self-restraint in their own personal lives for themselves. They're not going to do it for other people. And if they're going to, like I said, let the mask slip and show Joe Public and Joe Citizen what kind of, what really lies in their heart and soul, I say let them. And that allows people like us to demonstrate, decency and wisdom and intellect. And insofar that, I think those of us of our sort of approximate, political and ideological ilk see the deficiencies in, democracy, and understand that, trying to appeal to populism is fraught with all kinds of hazards and failures and dangers. But in the end, having more people who agree with you fundamentally is better than having less. And I think that if we can achieve that, even if it is a small W, it is a W nonetheless.
Well, what I would say is that this claim of, as you mentioned, Red Hog, that all men should just get vasectomies, shows you the totalitarian aspirations of the left, or at least the modern woke left. And I think eminently justifies a work that many in the manosphere, I think, should know of at this point, because I know Paul Elam has popularized it. The 1913 work by E. Balfour Bax, The Fraud of Feminism, where he argues that feminism is completely fictitious set of philosophical assumptions that are mutually contradictory, and that the real goal is to enslave men to the state. And I think that, that's really base for a Marxist to say, so, good on him. But basically, what you just said is the expression of that motive and drive that he saw over 100 years ago.
Yeah, very much so. Feminism has never been about equality. It's always been about revenge and restitution. There is no good feminism, none of this at all. And this needs to be drilled into everyone's heads if they, claim to be in right-wing circles. Egalitarianism is not good, and it absolutely needs to die. No exceptions.
And moreover, it's a lie. And it's funny, Folly, you were saying about, this kind of woke modern leftism. We need to also be cognizant of the fact that if one really looks at the suppositions which lie at the heart of this post-Jacobin, post-revolutionary liberalism, things like this, I'm not going to say they are its logical endpoint, but they approach its logical endpoint. And those kind of things, when they are explained in simple details, terrify normal people who just want to go about their lives. And being able to reveal the sheer debaseness and the evil which sits at the heart of these offshoots of this ideology, and approaching that endpoint, which is completely antithetical to everything good and decent about all of sort of Western civilization, again works to our advantage.
And just for my piece, I'll say that it's incredibly important that a lot of the men listening to this might be single, but it's just as important to continue basically training your wife after you have gotten married. And a lot of people, I know a lot of guys who like to keep their politics sort of separate from their wives. And I agree that politics is the realm of men, but it's important to basically help take the blinders off of your woman's eyes so that she sees it for the evil that it is as well. Because I know a lot of conservative, fairly traditional guys who, I talk to their women and I'm like, oh my God, did you just go to 4 years of college at some progressive university? I mean, I don't understand that disconnect, and oftentimes it ends in problems. But I think that it's important to continue that work within your own family as well, to take the blinders off and help them to also realize how evil these forces are, and how much better off they'd be in a world that sort of restrains itself.
If I can just buttress what you're saying there, Hammerhead, because it's so true. And most of us who've got a fair, bit of life experience, those of us who say 30 plus, some of us have found ourselves in these positions where we've had to make these choices, and particularly if you are a heartfelt or a sensitive person, it can cut you up inside, no doubt about it. But always be, for the men out there who are listening, be cognizant of these couple of chief points, and really they should be fulcrums upon which you build your life. Is that a house divided cannot stand. And I mean, yes, you and your woman don't necessarily, or your partner, or you shouldn't call them partner, your girlfriend, your wife, whatever. Okay, you might have different, I prefer, Chevrolet or Ford, or I prefer, this or that. I'd rather go to Hawaii or Florida, whatever. Like, you can disagree on things, but you ultimately cannot have diametrically opposite views about the way in which you live your life, the values which you pass down to your children, and ultimately the frame through which you view the world, and whether you adhere to reality or you sort of believe in a fanciful, sort of intellectually vapid nonsense, which is sort of what ultimately liberalism is like. It is built upon a lie, which is egalitarianism. And seriously, guys, no matter how hot she is, no matter, how good she might be at this or that or the other, it is better to become master of liking your own company. And for those of you who are fortunate to have good families, to enjoy the company of your nearest and your dearest, right? It is better that than someone who will wreck it. Because ultimately, if you try to compromise on that, you will have a miserable life that will be destroyed, or you will have to be a man who enjoys wearing the iron chains and being in a state of indentured domestic servitude. Choose your future wisely. Even if it's a hard choice at the moment, it will be better for you later.
Absolutely 100% true. Fantastic advice. We will absolutely be covering this more in the future. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me for Man's Hour. The last thing we're going to do is do a little bit of shilling right here. So we're going to go around. Furious, anything you want to plug, sir?
Actually, not really. I think I'm due to jump on with AA at some point and do a bit of an update on the situation in Ukraine, which is a sort of another one of those perspectives of reality versus fiction. But that's still TBA. I did record something with Mr. Majesty. We're expecting a little side show. We're talking about, for those who are familiar with this topic, a book called Icebreaker, which is positing the idea that the Soviets were in fact in an aggressive posture against Europe in 1940-41, and that Operation Barbarossa was a preemptive strike. So watch out for that when it goes online. I'll be sure to tweet that out and let you guys know. Actually, because interesting, because Mr. Folly and I had a discussion. What did we talk about recently? I can't remember what it was.
Well, we talked about a lot of things recently, but you did bring up Suvorov.
Yeah, that's right. I know it came up recently. So, because I know you and I have had a couple of discussions about World War I and whatever. So, yeah, that's all I've got to plug for now. I'll pass the bat over to Mr. Folly.
Yeah, so you can check me out on Twitter at Praise of Folly Podcast. You can check out my YouTube channel. You can also check out my locals, get updates there, support the channel there. Yeah, thanks for having me on, Red Hawk.
Yeah, anytime. Hammerhead, what do you got?
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I don't stream that much, but I am active. I listen to a lot of the streams and everything. I was on a stream with the Franklin a few months ago, and I would definitely shill him as somebody who's good to listen to. He has a stream once a month, and he talks about a lot of different aspects of his life. He has 4 kids. He was an expat for a long time before moving back to Australia, and he's somebody who he actually was the impetus for me to move out into a more rural area. So I would definitely give him a listen. But no, I don't have anything of my own to show. I barely have enough time to listen to all of the academic agent streams. So and others. So.
All right, cool. Well, thanks guys for joining me. You guys all had provided great value. For myself, I will shill follow my Twitter account and my Substack. All the links for everyone's associated channels and Twitter accounts are in the description below. I will be streaming on a Wednesday with a judicialist. He's one of our guys on Twitter. We're going to be discussing marriage and the red pill, so certain tactics you can use within a relationship and marriage setting. He's going to come on and talk about that. And the last thing I will shill is that I will be in Las Vegas for Freedom Fest. That's coming up in a couple weeks here. I'll be there the entire week. So if anyone's in the Vegas area, reach out to me on Twitter and we could do a meetup or something like that. So until then, be well, everyone, and we'll see you next time.